under the light. I like that. Cool. I think all right, this section is about Hannah Arendt. And I'm doing this for Kenneth because he's my good friend. And he loves Hannah Arendt. So there's a wonderful book written by Julia Kristeva. And those of you may know Julia Kristeva already, but she studied Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin, and the notion of intertextuality and interbeing and some other things. But in this book, she's writing kind of the life story of Hannah Arendt. And it's a really good, she's an excellent writer. I mean, beautiful writer. But I want you to notice the subtitle here, which is Life is a Narrative. And the chapter that she has says Life is a Story. And for me, those are two different kind of entities. But let's just look at some of the things that she says about life as a story. So she says, Hannah Arendt is a fervent admirer of the narrated life. And she did this through her writing and her politics, her action. And in that process, Hannah Arendt, one of the key concepts is the vitalist activism. So the activism in life. And instead of a thinking that calculates, calculated thinking, like in consumerism, Hannah Arendt was very much against that and wanted what we call, Grace Ann and I call the living stories of the vital process of life. And it had a sacred dynamic, a sacred dimension in it as well. So this is one of the things that appeals to me about it. So a life full of events which ultimately can be told as a story. This is page 8 here on the book. So somebody was asking before, what is the relationship of story and narrative to Hannah Arendt? I think it's a very deep relationship. And as Julia Kristeva describes it, story is a kind of praxis. So rather than story as a kind of literature or you tell the story of your elevator pitch or something like that, that's not what Hannah Arendt is doing with storytelling and narrative. A life that never ceases to inquire into meaning and action. Right? So, and doing that, illuminating the human experience. So the story of history, the story of the political, these different kinds of stories are very much part of developing story as praxis. So praxis is defined as theory and action, theory and practice together, and that the word is praxis, kind of a Marxist kind of notion. People listening and telling together fits very well with the work Grace Ann and I do on together telling and together listening. So this notion of being part of history, taking an active role to create the history and create the future as well, and to join in the existence of the world, to be a joiner in of the existence of the world. I love the projects that you've developed here in the writing workshop because they were about that. If I could pick I won't use your name in the film, but this notion in Kosovo of the lawsuit to silence activists, you know that Hannah Arendt would be all over that, you know, because it's a restriction of women speaking their voices. It's got all of the elements of nature in fighting against the dams, etc. So this was something I thought was really important about Hannah Arendt. Life is a story. Now, Hannah Arendt had a love affair. She was a student of Martin Heidegger, and then they had a love affair, and in his old age, she took care of him. So a long relationship of love and hatred of Martin Heidegger. One of the things she hated about Martin Heidegger, just a little aside, is he would never comment on her writing. She did all this prolific writing, and he wouldn't. He just stayed with his being and time and his own self-development of that book. But she says to insert ourselves into a living world is what her praxis was about. A story is a memory of an action, a birth, an endless beginning anew in the public space. And my own practice of that is every Tuesday, and today's Tuesday, we have our own circle that meets on Zoom. We call it the Enthinkment Circle, but it's a kind of our form of a Bakhtinian circle. Now, why did Bakhtin have a circle? Because Stalin didn't like that Bakhtin was writing sometimes about the sacred. So that was a big violation in Stalinism. And Stalin didn't like that Bakhtin refused to write about the dialectic. Now, some of the other authors in the Bakhtin circle did write about dialectic, but this was a very underground meeting of the group. And so our circle is called Enthinkment Circle. An Enthinkment Circle, which meets today, and I'm making this film for them, is about combining thinking in the heart in your writing and in your philosophy as well. So it's an attempt by me and my colleagues, my students, former students, and professors that are there now. We meet each week to talk about my mentor in my graduate program, which was Louis Ralph Pondy, P-O-N-D-Y, and he made a statement contrary to enactment of sense-making one time. He made this statement one time. You can download the book at enthinkment.com, E-N-T-H-I-N-K-M-E-N-T.com. And so he said it and then turned it into a joke because he was embarrassed to say this word in front of Carl Weick, who's also a good mentor of mine, and I like Carl Weick very much, so I'm not against Weick, but what I am trying to do is open a space for a kind of thinking that I think is very consistent with Hannah Arendt's thinking with the heart. That's what you asked me to prepare, the heart and the head, but also the action of the body, you know, in doing this life as a story. The alignment of the heart and the thinking is really important. It goes beyond enactment, sense-making. So sense-making is defined, since they were cognitive psychologists, social psychologists, is what you can see, taste, hear, sense, smell, taste, you know, the five senses. I think I covered most of them. Then, but that's a very cognitive driven notion of how you're sensing an object around you. But in life as a story, I believe that Hannah Arendt was tuned in to a more existential approach, although Heidegger was against the word existential, but a more ontological approach, I think you would agree with that, to being in the world. And Hannah Arendt's objection to Martin Heidegger was that he wasn't political. Not only was he wasn't political, he joined the Nazi Party, and he was very stupid about the political. And so that's about it. I wanted to just say that Hannah Arendt was an admirer of the narrated life, in other words, writing it, but also acting out the living story in life. that concludes my comment on Hannah Arendt.
Thank you.
But the expert is Kenneth.
Oh, he's also.
All of you are experts. Okay.
He actually did give her some recognition at the end of his life.
Oh, good.
Yeah,